Well, I know I'm supposed to be addressing Kant, but I want to do one on Spinoza. It's not just Spinoza actually, but the topic is compassion, as you can see. And I was prompted to produce this by a little exchange I had with a guy called Jim on Patreon. And he said, it's there in the comments, so I'm not saying anything that he hasn't said. He said that after 70 years he'd found Spinoza and found something at last that made sense to him. Well, join the club, Jim. That was pretty much the same for me. Spinoza is the anchor point for me. I had Kant and Schopenhauer and whoever else, Lao Tzu, Gurdjieff, because they give me a different view on many of the same topics that Spinoza addressed. Anyway, you can see that I've got here a typical kind of bullshit thing that you can find on the internet about empathy and compassion. So what does this person Panache Desai say? These names do amuse me. I have no idea who this person is, or whether their real name is Panache Desai or Eric Littlebottom. This guy's, or I don't know if it's a woman, but this person's real name could be Eric Littlebottom, but it wouldn't have the same ring, would it, as Panache Desai? A little bit like Ram Dass or Eckhart Tolle, whose real name, as you know, probably is not Eckhart Tolle. He used the word Eckhart because it's a good bit of marketing, actually. Many people have heard the name Master Eckhart, the mystic from the Middle Ages. Anyway, it's big business, all this stuff. And people like to fluff up their egos a little bit by saying that they're empathic and compassionate people. So this says, you can read it, but empathy and compassion allows us to hold a space of love in the midst of whatever is arising. Well, there you go, that's all you need to know. A space of love, whatever that is. Now, there are millions of statements like this, and Buddhism particularly has been bastardized to appear, at least, as a source of this kind of thing. I knew a guy in Australia who studied early Buddhism. Early Buddhism has nothing to do with this. Early Buddhism is ruthless. And there are writers who say that the Buddha was not concerned with the masses of people. He knew that what he was teaching would only be understood by a few people. And that the rest would sort of go to hell. Not literally, of course, but so this kind of popularization through, if you light an incense stick and put a little bowl of flowers somewhere, then that helps you be empathic, compassionate. Early Buddhism wasn't like that at all. It was ruthless. Anyway, that's a different topic. I will get in contact with that guy again, actually, because I can't remember the name of the people that he referred to, but it was interesting. Anyway, so empathy and compassion. Just let me say that where I live, in Portugal, a lot of laws have been introduced recently to control exploitation and treatment of animals, and they need to have those laws. But the expats who come here assume a superior attitude to the Portuguese. The Portuguese are far nearer to death Yeah, I only have to go 4 or 5 miles behind where I live, and there are villages where they take the pig out in autumn or whenever there's a festival or holiday, and put a pickaxe through its head. I mean, it kills it fairly quickly as long as they get it right. But they're nearer to death. They don't go into a supermarket and buy a nicely packed little piece of beef or pork or whatever. So being nearer to death, they understand that we're all nearer to death, including their pets. So if their pets get a fairly bad illness, they don't necessarily go rushing down to the vet. They just might let it die. It's nature. I'll have more to say about that in a moment. Anyway, so let's see what Spinoza has to say about this. The same slide. And this is proposition 50 from part 4 of the Ethics. Now, Spinoza has more to say about compassion in part 3, but let me just read this before I get on to all of that. Hence it follows that the man who lives by the dictates of reason endeavours as far as he can not to be touched by pity. Some translations use the word compassion. So it follows that the man who lives by the dictates of reason endeavours as far as he can not to be touched by compassion. Oh my God, get the holy water out. Sprinkle your iPhone or your iPad or whatever you're listening to this on. Get a crucifix out, stick it in front of the screen. What is this man saying? Do not be touched by compassion. It goes against everything New Age, and yet the reasoning behind this is so watertight. You really can't argue with it. Unless you want to, and let me tell you, I had a very difficult time with this. Because, my little ego liked to fluff itself up a bit now and then and say, well, you're a nice, compassionate person, Martin. If you see somebody in the street, you'll give them €5 or, something. I can't tell you the things I've done in the past and been taken incredible advantage of because, I felt pity or something for someone. I was taken to the cleaners, but that's a different story. But anyway, I had a difficult time with this. So why is Spinoza saying this? This is actually the corollary from proposition 50. The actual proposition itself says, in the man who lives by the guidance of reason, pity, or compassion, is in itself bad and disadvantageous. Well, why is it bad? Well, the proof says very clearly why it's bad. Pity is pain, and therefore, in itself, is bad. Unless you like pain, of course. Unless you like pouring your heart out to all the people around you to try and demonstrate what a kind, compassionate person you are, then why would you want to indulge in pain? He's not saying we shouldn't help people. I'll get onto that in a moment. But he's saying that entertaining pity is really just self-torture. Why would you do that? This brings me to a very, very big point in all of this. Let me move on to the scholium, because this is very profound. He says, he who rightly knows that all things follow from the necessity of the divine nature. Well, divine nature, what the hell is divine nature? Well, divine nature is basically, and Spinoza does state this somewhere, is basically the laws of existence, if you like. He who rightly knows that all things follow from the necessity of the laws of existence and happen in accordance with the eternal laws and rules of nature will surely find nothing deserving of hatred, derision, or contempt, nor will he pity anyone. You have to understand an awful lot to understand that. And you have to gone into yourself quite a lot to understand that. I kind of touched on it on the axioms of not compassion, axioms of what the hell was it? Axioms of Contentment. Finally got there. Because if you are fighting the way the world is all the time, you're not going to be exactly content, are you? And we do have this thing built into us that unless we are in some state of angst, then somehow we're not being kind or compassionate or considerate or whatever. So I'll read that again. He who rightly knows that all things follow from the necessity of the divine nature and happen in accordance with the eternal laws and rules of nature will surely find nothing deserving of hatred, derision, or contempt, nor will he pity anyone. Rather, as far as the virtue of man extends, he will endeavour to do well, and as the saying goes, be glad. Why wouldn't you be glad? Well, there are a lot of reasons why people are not glad, and I can tell you mine. I like to whinge about things. Not so much these days, but I did used to like to whinge about things an awful lot. Why is there so much suffering? That was my perpetual whinge. And as the Zen teacher said, no reason. There is no reason. It's just the way the universe unfolds. And 3 or 4 podcasts ago, I went through the Theological Political Treatise, chapter 16, where Spinoza lays out in black and white the way the universe works. Might is right. Big black holes consume galaxies. Big galaxies consume small galaxies. Big fish consume small fish. Powerful people exploit weaker people, and we whinge about it and think that actually it's all wrong. Now, in part 3 of the Ethics, Spinoza does explain why we feel compassion. We feel compassion for things because they form an image that reminds us of ourselves. Our body, if you like, is effectively feeling sorry for itself. Our power is diminished. We see someone in a horrible situation, say, and our body identifies with that image because what we're looking at looks like us in that situation. And so we feel what we call compassion or pity. And we want to do something about it because, in actual fact, what we want to do is alleviate our own suffering through that identification. Anyway, that's another proposition in part 3. So back to this bit in the Scholium. As Kant says, I keep promising to go through it, but I just haven't got the approach to that right yet. But the podcast will appear when I've sorted it out in my mind. As Kant says, you have nothing inside you, inside your mind, without there being a whole pile of stuff outside your body. You are full of words, images, symbols, memories, whatever, that are taken from the outside. If you had none of that stuff, you would have nothing going on inside. How could you? You'd have no language in which to think, no images to pull up from your memory or to imagine in your mind. There'd be nothing in there. So you are formed by the rest of the universe. You think there's someone in there, there isn't. Anyway, I'm digressing a little bit. So, what is compassion proper? Well, he goes on to say, I think this is a bit pretty much at the end of the Scholium. Now, I emphasize that I am here speaking of the man who lives by the guidance of reason. For he who is moved neither by reason nor by pity to render help to others is rightly called inhuman, for he seems to be unlike a man. Well, why is he inhuman? Well, because he is not identifying at a, through a passivity, what Spinoza would call a passivity. There's no identification with the image of someone who is suffering. Just doesn't seem to have that ability to, or his body doesn't have that ability to feel, well, that image could be me, so I want to alleviate the suffering. So at a passive level. At an active level, the active level is basically, if we all look after each other, then we're all stronger. It's as simple as that. No emotions needed, just reason. If we are all supportive of each other, then we're all stronger. So it makes sense for us to all help and assist each other. Because one day you might need help, I might need help. It's better if we all work together effectively. And yes, I know that doesn't happen, but it doesn't stop us operating from that idea, which is pure reason. Now, how does this fit in with Kant and Schopenhauer? Well, Schopenhauer's view on morality and Kant's, in my opinion, are just way off the mark. Schopenhauer found Spinoza's cold rationalism, or what he felt was cold rationalism, repulsive. I can't remember the word he used, something like repulsive, an abomination. He referred to certain parts of the theological political treatise, saying that this is just cold-hearted and whatever. Schopenhauer was a very emotional and sensitive man. You can see that in the way that he writes, and he found reality difficult to deal with. Spinoza just says 20,000 people burning in one night when Dresden was firebombed is part of, that's the way God planned it. We can't help but feel something about that, but we have to rise above that, which seems inhuman, but it isn't inhuman. Spinoza's great mission through the ethics and his other works was to alleviate our suffering. He says that God is the cause of our suffering very explicitly in Proposition 18 in Part 5. That bastard God has put us in a situation where we suffer. Well, that's kind of treating God like he's a person. A better way of putting it is that the laws of the universe are such that we will suffer. But as he says, through understanding, we can derive some pleasure just by understanding what is going on. That's the best we can do. Anyway, to get back to Schopenhauer, Schopenhauer put compassion right at the root of his morality. Personally, I don't buy it. I've been there and done all that compassion stuff. It's draining, and it achieves nothing. It doesn't mean that I don't try and help people if I can, and have done many times in my life. But it means that I try and use reason. Now Kant, his morality is based on his idea that we can, well, it's very difficult to explain in a few words, but For Kant, we are at a phenomenal level, little machines running around. At a noumenal level, in other words, the real us that we can't see and know because we are bounded by time and space as conscious entities, the real us has free will, and so it can operate according to what is best. The notion of goodwill is very strong with Kant. I kind of like Kant's analysis, but the problem is he doesn't really talk about what's going on in most of us most of the time. Envy, hatred, attachment to things, love of things, excitement. He doesn't really talk about that very much. He kind of speaks as though, well, yes, we've got all these animal instincts and things, but we can forget about that and operate from ought and should and goodwill and so on. Well, it's not really going to happen, is it? As I mentioned before, I know people who've tried to do that. It doesn't work. They end up in a bit of a mess. Anyway, so that's the whole thing on compassion. Read Proposition 50 in Part 4 of the Ethics. And the bigger message here is that for every emotion that we have that is passive, we can have a similar emotion that is active, that comes from us instead of being generated by external events and things that impact upon us. Anyway, I hope that's been useful, and the next podcast will be Kant, and I'll be starting on the transcendental aesthetic. God alone knows how that's going to go, because with Kant is pulling back the veil of Maya, our illusion. You wouldn't expect that to be easy or simple, because the veil of Maya is the thing that keeps us, how can I put it, in our illusions, that keeps us operating as animals, reproducing, making sure we survive and all the rest of it. So pulling back that veil is going to be tortuous. Sorry, but it is. But I kind of like that sort of thing. Anyway, so transcendental aesthetic on the next podcast for the Kant people who joined a month or so ago and haven't seen a great deal of Kant, for which I apologise. There will be more soon.